Good morning, everybody. How are we doing today? It is Wednesday morning. Got some karaoke to sing tonight. That should be kind of fun. All in all, life is good. We keep counting our blessings. In spite of injustice in the world, jazz reminds us that we have it pretty good. I certainly don't like the direction of what some things are heading, but in the end, karma is a powerful force, and justice and truth always exist. And jazz is a light in these times to remind us, people have had it much tougher than we do. You have to go back to the 40s to recognize that. And jazz, of course, was the embodiment of a people struggling in the wilderness, dreaming of a promised land, dreaming of a better place, a place in a time where freedom was a thing. And Nina Simone said it best when she defined freedom as not being afraid. And I think it's so hard for people who have freedom, who don't live in fear, to quantify what freedom is. And we so end up with flag waving and fireworks and this nonsensical ideology of what freedom is. Freedom is not living in fear. And there's no better way to describe what freedom is, especially if you've ever lived under the thumb, especially if you've ever lived in tyranny. Thankfully, we're not there yet. We all live under the thumb of the billionaire class. Of course, here in America and Canada and the West, we live a more privileged life from that oppression of the world's billions of people. But still, it's not a life of freedom. There's the oppression of debt, which is a great weight, and the fear of constantly losing your belongings and health and property. And your health, you lose that here in America, you can lose everything. So if you have your health, you got to count your blessings. But my friends in the trans community and the gay community, queer community, my friends of immigrant status, my friends who are minorities, African Americans, women, there is a lot of fear. And I think both sides are kind of guilty of one pushing an agenda and the other side kind of fomenting almost a euphoric panic. I think the euphoric panic helps establish a lot of the chaos. And at the end of the day, media on both sides is still run by the elite. And so we need to have common sense. We need to have some kind of grounding. And for me, everyday jazz is that grounding. Jazz is that reminder. And of course, the pages of the history books as well. It kind of constantly illuminates to be thankful for the times you live in, if you have a measure of freedom and if you have a measure of, as a white male in the West, my privilege is a daily circumstance that I happen to live within, and I appreciate that. It's by no means a fear-free existence. For years, the war on drugs had a lot of people living in fear. It was an excuse and a justification to throw someone's liberties out the window and to violate them and to prosecute them and to arrest them and to incarcerate them. I've been drug-free now for a number of years. I don't even smoke pot anymore, even though now here in Minnesota it's legal. It's just my divorce kind of separated me from that experience, put me in a place that reminded me too much of my marriage, and not that that's of any interest to people, but there's just so many different ways you can live in fear. And fear is so much the result and the product of oppression and ignorance. And those are really the two main sources of fear. And there's the fear of not knowing what's going to happen, not knowing what's causing that pain in your chest. The fear of not knowing Muslims or blacks or gay people, and then you hear all the negative things in the media and you live in the fear. Knowledge is what the bridge to empathy, and ignorance is the bridge to fear, which becomes hate all too quick. So empathy is the end result we are all hoping for, and that our empathy extends to all parts of this creation. And if you believe in a creator or divinity of any kind, that creator should have invented and created all of this being, regardless of color, race, religion. And I think so many of us, these religions in this world, are such temporal, short-term ideologies that don't encompass the entirety of humanity and really can't speak for all of us. I mean, the Aborigines were painting caves in Australia 40,000 years ago, dreaming of mythologies and gods. And if your religion and belief system doesn't encompass that 40,000 years of oral and the later written history, your religion falls short, because if it was the be-all and end-all of all things, it should have encompassed that and recognized that. And of course, as far as the Judeo-Christian Muslim tradition, I mean, you're talking a couple, 3,000-4,000 years at best for the case of the Judaic legacy. There's just so much humanity that exists before that. And there's so much of a human history that we need to be more empathetic towards. And so often our empathy extends to those within my group, which allows the exploitation and the excessive wealth of me and my group, and the justification for me to have and you not to have. And all these are ideologies that are rooted in the greed and in the consequential suffering of so many. I'm just trying to stay centered and recognize that things aren't as bad as some say. Things aren't as rosy as some want to believe. They usually never are. But we still have power, warm water, food in my stomach, and I mean, the cost of everything is astronomical nowadays. It's hard to keep up at times. And that being said, I mean, I got a mortgage due, and I could again use some help here with some donations from my channel. Anybody want to help me out, please, through PayPal. It's in the description below. Please send a little bit of money to help support this coffee shop. I mean, the jazz collection on these walls, it's an impressive collection of the jazz history. And this needs to stay as a resource for people to come. And I do have people coming from all over. It's such a small slice of the American entertainment puzzle right now. Anyway, let's move on. I just want to try to uplift people a little bit, because I know there's a lot of discomfort right now, a lot of apprehension. You can feel it. You can feel how people spend money right now. People are just on edge. And the tariffs and all the trade, the talk of the 51st state in Canada. I mean, it's, by the way, go Canada. Nice they pulled that hockey game out. A lot of social and political implications behind that game. It's funny how sport can sometimes embody larger elements of life. But today I want to talk to you about a few Blue Note records that I hold dear, and I think are some of the finest parts of the Blue Note canon. And with Blue Note, it's almost impossible to not end up speaking about records that I've spoken about before. I mean, I've talked about most of the Blue Note canon at some point. I mean, it's 500 titles strong, and that's not including the 78 RPM stuff, which a lot of gets culled on the 10-inch and 12-inch era anyway. The 10-inch sequence is a very different chapter of Blue Note history. Of course, there's linkages, but there's no question that the direction of Blue Note changes sharply in 55 with the dawning of the LP era. And for those of you who don't remember, they almost sold out with that switching of the 10-inch to the 12-inch LP. It was another investment that they just made from 78 to 10-inch 4 years prior. And now to switch inventory again, and then your jackets and it was just, and the RCAs and Capitals and Columbias were kind of forcing everyone's hand. You had to kind of follow what the big boys were doing or else get lost in the ocean. And RCA and Columbia, I think, were 53, were putting out LPs. And so Blue Note almost sold to Atlantic, which itself was an up-and-coming label in 55. By no means was Atlantic this giant that we think of today. They were on their way towards that, far more advanced than probably Blue Note was. But 55 Atlantic was still a fairly young enterprise. And it's with the Ray Charles and of course Aretha Franklin shortly after that Atlantic really elevates itself into a nationally distributed label. And Blue Note, would they have remained a subsidiary of? It sounds like Al and Frank were thinking about just getting out of the game, period. But again, they persevered, and they decided to soldier on. And they issued some 10-inch stuff early on in their discography, repackaged in the 12-inch LP. But by 15, 20 in their sequence, they start issuing, new material. And there's still a few LPs that come out in the next year or so that are older material stock, but unlike a lot of their counterparts, they kind of switched to new material almost exclusively really quickly. They never did greatest hits, they never did label compilations, they never did instrument compilations, they never did Christmas records. They just documented the young black soldier in a social war. They document the militancy, the aggression, the lack of patience that a lot of them were feeling towards their promises that were never delivered on. And bebop was this kind of response to the commercial blech that the swinger had become. And it was Parker delving through the science of numbers and finding new melody and new brilliant original compositional ideology within the mathematics without ever making it sound scientific. And Parker's revelations were so dramatic and so changed the face of the music. And it was sophisticated stuff. You had to be an elevated player to even attempt bebop. And it did alienate the pop side of the jazz community. It wasn't a pop music. It was music for musicians, but it was still, Parker was always beautiful. Parker was always melodic. Parker was always effortless and never felt forced or never felt like it was driven by ego and listen to me and listen to what I thought of. It was never that. It was always just a natural enterprise that changed the face of the music. And pretty soon most of the other black people in the community were following it, and eventually the white cats were following it. And bebop changed the landscape of jazz so dramatically. And some labels documented bebop, other labels didn't want to touch it. Your big labels didn't really do bebop. Sad Boy was kind of the one really documenting a lot of Roost does. Early Blue Note 10-inch stuff, it's not really doing. There's a little Fast Navarro, there's a few things in there, but it wasn't really capturing that. And when Clifford Brown and Art Blakey record those sessions at Birdland, this is groundbreaking stuff. And it's kind of, I mean, Lou Donaldson was just fantastic on those records. People forget how much Lou could play bebop. And Curly Russell, I mean, it's just a fantastic assemblage of talent. Those Birdland set, and those were on 10 inch, there was 3 volumes, the ended being packaged as 2 LPs. And somehow Frank and Al got that. They're like, man, this is, and with all due credit being given to Clifford Brown and Max Roach, it was that quintet coming out of Chicago and Emerson that really pushes the envelope and kind of codifies what hard bop was going to be. A little bit more accessible, a little bit more melodic, a little bit more stating the root melody of a song. A little slower in tempo, but still aggressive. And aggression really is one of the most important tenets of hard bop. But that Birdland stuff with Clifford Brown, Lou Donaldson, Art Blakey, it quickly, I mean, Clifford ends up going on to the Max Roach Quintet with Harold Land. And that group is just changing the landscape. And if you read all the liner notes from those records, no one's talking about Miles Davis, no one's talking about John Coltrane, no one's talking about all the people that we think of today as the great, even like Monk. I mean, you played like Parker, and Clifford Brown was the new coming, the new savior. Brown was, I mean, he's referenced on so many liner notes. And liner notes give you a real perspective of what was being said at the time, what the introspection was of the critics and the writers at that time. And of course, Miles, being the grifter that he was quick to bring Coltrane into his fold with Garland, Chambers, and Philly Joe. And that quintet, which was at Prestige, soon to be at Columbia, also jumps on that hard bop bandwagon in a lot of ways. And they worked on their chops and they played a lot live in '55, and when Columbia signs them in '56, I mean, those are milestones. Boy, Cook and Work and Steam and Relaxing at Prestige, it's fantastic stuff. But there's no question that Art Blakey and the Messengers, Clifford Brown and Max Roach are the real progenitors of what hard bop was. And Blue Note lives in that vein for 4 years. 56, 57, 58, 59. And that's really the essence of what the hard bop thing was in those years. And by 60, it starts to diverge into different things. And that leads us to where we're going to be today in what we're listening to. By the time the 4000 series comes along, I think in 59, maybe, or late, I guess 59. Could have been late 58. But they make 100 titles in the 1500 series, and for some unknown reason, they jumped to 4000. And it was around that time when they started doing stereo and mono pressings, and eventually just stereo. And I can't remember exactly, but I mean, I think that might have been part of the reason. But they do go to the 4000 sequence, so there is no 16, 17, 1800 series. I mean, just goes 1500 up to 1600, which was that Three Sounds record debut, and then they jumped to 4000. And I mean, from 1550 through 4100, some of the greatest hard bop records consistently ever put out by anybody. But around that time, jazz starts reshaping itself again. And the first record we're going to talk about today is Ike Quebec, Heavy Soul. And Ike Quebec was an A&R guy for Blue Note, a talent guy. He helped arrange sessions and pick sidemen for guys. An important but very forgotten, unheralded guy today. Quebec was a beautiful tenor player in his own. And he does some 45 sessions for Blue Note that were kind of R&B tinged, elements of, soul and jump blues a little bit, but they were really just R&B tinged jazz stuff. And that stuff was eventually issued as the Ike Quebec 45 sessions. But the boys of Blue Note weren't quick to give him a session as a leader. He was an A&R guy. He was kind of busy doing a lot of that stuff. And Ike was pushing for, give me some sessions of my own. And boys at Blue Note finally kind of agreed to allow that to be the case. And he makes 4 records of him as a leader. Might as well be Spring, Heavy Soul, Blue and Sentimental. I mean, there's 4 of them. There's the Bossa Nova one. Oh boy, these are just four of the most beautiful Ben Webster influenced tenor jazz records that anybody will ever introduce to you. And Ike Quebec is one of those guys that, if you're not really a jazz person and you want to get to know jazz, you don't want to start with John Cody. You don't want to start with Sonny Rollins. You want to start with a guy like Ike Quebec. But no one will ever tell you that. He's so peripheral in today's landscape. But these are beautiful, ethereal, moody, bluesy, soul-drenched records that just speak to the soul. And they just hover in the room like a mist. They're just there. They just occupy your ears and make your heart feel something. And Ike was an old guy, and he passes away in early 61 or 2, opening the door to Duke Pearson filling that A&R chair, who we'll talk about here in a minute. But Ike Quebec, Heavy Soul, is one of my favorite Blue Notes. And it's not a hard bop record. It's kind of, like I said, in the Ben Webster, Coleman Hawkins, even some Lester Young tradition. The great Milt Hinson's on the bass, Freddie Roach on the organ, and Al Harewood on the drums. This is what I think most people want when they start to dive into jazz. But so many of the monocle-wearing jazz elitists will steer you. Oh, you have to get some Pharoah Saunders. Oh, you have to get some Ornette Coleman. Because I'm a sophisticate, my monocle's in, and I know all of what jazz is about. I get it. And if you want to get it, you have to listen to the most difficult, eye-screeching, ear-bleeding shit ever, because that's what jazz is. And, I mean, I think that's peripheral stuff at best, and this is what the landscape of jazz really was about. So, I mean, Ike Quebec, you can't really go wrong. Next, we're going to talk Lou Donaldson. I got a couple Lou Donaldson records pulled here. And we mentioned Lou Donaldson being part of that great Clifford Brown, Art Blakey session in '53 at Birdland. But Donaldson was a bebopper, hard bopper. Lou Donaldson taken off like 1591. It was one of the great hard bop records. And the guy has the chops. He plays with all that fire. But I think given his nature and his personality, and again, you want to know personality, one of the three main brushstrokes of jazz. There's experience, there's environment you're born into, the experience in that environment, and the third brushstroke is your personality. How do you handle your experience in your environment? And your personality will dictate the temperament and the tonality and the aggression and the patience you have for the life you're living. And how, I mean, just like anyone's personality will dictate what they write, how they paint. It dictates in jazz more than most music, because jazz is an expression and improvisation of my emotional condition. And so if I'm a cool cat, kind of laid back and we're just like, oh, relax, we'll get through this. I'd rather flirt with some candy jelly roll than get too worked up about politics. I mean, that's going to be revealed in your playing if you listen to enough of my music. And I mean, there's countless examples of that revelation being apparent when you dive deep into a jazz player. Their personality is on their sleeve and they're expressing how they see the world. And the guy next to him might have a very similar experience and environment, but their personality might be very different. So one might be militant and one might be blasé-faire. But if you look at Lou Donaldson, look at the smile on that man's face. He's a very flirtatious man. A lot of his album covers kind of reveal that nature. And so while he played hard bop, while he played bebop, I think he was quick to move into soul jazz and elements of the cool, which he was never really a cool player, but I think what he does is very cool bop in a way. These records in the early 60s, late 50s by him are often just some of the funnest, most lightly but yet deep swinging records you'll ever hear. Donald Bailey, Peck Morrison, Jimmy, and Ray Barretto on the conga. And whenever you see the Barretto confluence with Lou Donaldson, you're going to get some Latin tinged inflection on that session, which makes it even more buoyant, makes it even more joyous, even more light. And yet the guy has a depth. You don't get to be a brother in America in the 40s and 50s and get to be 50 years old and not have some wisdom and some experience. And so while he has a bit of a joy to him. There's a dark depth as well. And I find Donaldson's mid-era pre-Boogaloo stuff some of the most compelling and fun and addicting jazz in the canon. And I can listen to Donaldson's records sometimes 2, 3, 4 times in a row, just play it over and over because it's such a fun headspace. It's not dark, it's not brooding, it's not, but yet it's compelling and it brings a skip to my step. And I play him a lot of my DJ sets. I love Donaldson. So this is Lightfoot. Green Eyes is fantastic on this. Hogmaw is fantastic on this. Herman Foster, the great piano players on this. Herman Foster was at Argo for much of his career. Peck Morrison, Jimmy Wormworth, Ray Barretto. Lightfoot, great record. I mean, it's jazz for people who don't want to be too sophisticated. You don't have to get all philosophical and intellectual and spiritual to put on a Lou Donaldson record and just to fall into the groove. This one's a little different, 4066, same year. Again, the flirtatious persona. Look at the man smile. He's not Coltrane. He's not Lee Morgan. He's a light spirit. And it's inflected in all of his tonality and his buoyancy and his love and affirmation of what he's doing. Here he's playing in a very kind of a soul gospel jazz setting with the great Grant Green, St. Louis bred guitarist, Babyface Blood on the organ, who was one of Blue Note's many attempts to replace Jimmy Smith, who had left for Verve Records, and Dave Bailey on the drums. Again, fun record. Foggy Days, great. Here 'Tis is great. I mean, Cool Blue. I love this era of Donaldson. And then we mentioned Duke Pearson, the guy who kind of took Ike Quebec's job when Quebec passed as A&R guy, talent scout, session coordinator, sideman designator. I mean, he really knew how to put together, and he was very much in the footsteps of Ike Quebec. A great pianist in his own right, and he has a lot of influence from the great Duke Ellington, which I can't remember, but he might have even been nicknamed Duke as a part of that. But these early sessions of his at Blue Note, this one, Profile, and the Tender Moments, I think it's the second one's called, they're trio sessions, and they're just beautiful melodic ballads, a fine sense of time and dynamics, ideas of clarity and brightness, a flowing, effortless swing. Duke Pearson is one of my favorite guys. Again, of that next tier of Blue Note guys that people don't really talk about. Gene Taylor and Lex Humphreys round up the session here. And, I mean, again, when I'm DJing, I can play anything from this record, like Someone in Love, Black Coffee, Gate City Blues, Witchcraft. These are just fantastic versions of these songs in a very cocktail, kind of light sensibility, but still the guy has a profound darkness and depth. And then his next records, like Wahoo, started embracing a little bit more of the avant-garde and like more of the Ellington compositional ideology. And by the late 60s, he's doing some pretty bigger ensemble stuff. Again, revealing some of his Ellington roots. But, I mean, Pearson's records, especially those first two, are just great, easy listening jazz that you can't get enough of. From the same era, Grant Stand by Grant Green. And I played this the other day at the bar. And I had like 4 people come up to me and ask me about it, and people were pulling up their Shazam and trying to Shazam it. And I played Grandstand at one point. I played My Funny Valentine, and I played Old Folks as well. And it was kind of rounding up the night, towards the end of the night, and I was kind of mixing this in with some kind of deep house stuff. I'd play 4 minutes of a Grant Green song, and then find some house stuff, deep house, I would kind of mix in. And then kind of come out of that and go back into and again, guitar jazz is such a great bar sounding feel and vibe. It's light and it moves along. Guitar is a reference point that people are familiar with. It doesn't have the bright horns that cut in the conversation. The title song, Grandstand, is just a fantastic tour de force. And boy, I gotta say, Jack McDuff just cooks on this session. McDuff is largely a prestige guy, but McDuff is just on fire. And Yusuf Lateef as well is just really bringing some interesting tonality on this record. I think he plays flute on some of it. He does, yeah. Tenor and flute. And so really just a gem of a post-hardbop Blue Note session that these are hard to label records because they're not hardbop. They're not really cool. They're not really... I mean, this leans towards soul jazz, but soul jazz kind of scares people away because I think it's going to be this kind of lighthearted affair. And none of these Blue Note sessions have anything but depth to them. And if you look at, Grant Green's face, compare that to Lou Donaldson, Grant Green, you can see the gospel in that man's face. He's an intercession. He's a very deep spiritual, intellectual. And if you look at Pearson, look at his face. I mean, there's some somberness and some introspection going on with what this man is saying. So again, looking at a guy's face and his expression and what is he emoting, it's a powerful tool to help you understand what his fingers are emoting from his soul via improvisation in his playing. That face is a direct interlocutor. It's almost like a painting revealing my emotional expression. And if you want to get jazz and you want to feel jazz and you want jazz to come to life to you, it's not about blowing your mind with squawking and honking. It's about recognizing, oh man, this is the guy expressing how he feels. It's not about notes and virtuosity and talent and ability and composition. It's never about ego. It's never about any of those intellectual barometers. All the things that we think we come to jazz going, oh man, these guys are great players. They're trying to show how technically proficient they were. It's never really that. Parker wasn't trying to show you how intellectual he was, even though what he did was very, but he didn't even understand it mathematically. Dizzy Gillespie had to come along and do the science of it, because Dizzy had that knowledge of the musical science. But it's never about that science or the math. It's about, this is my soul telling you how I fucking feel. And until you listen to jazz with that spectacle on, you cannot and will not hear it or get it. And so many of the pundits, so many of the critics, so many of the reviewers, when they're not talking about the pressings and the vinyl and the series and the reissues, they start talking about, oh man, the technical prowess of the guys. No. What is he making you feel? Any artist, any painter, any playwright wants to get that impact from you. What did I make you feel with my art? I mean, for fuck's sake, art is about that. Art is about our emotional context. Art is about our emotional reaction and interaction with the life that we're living, and those who are living life around us. And to mismeasure it as some kind of intellectual foray into how my ego wants to show you how talented I am, you're fucking missing everything that jazz is about. And it's just, I can't say it loud enough or often enough. Jazz is about a man's soul, telling you how the fuck he feels and how tired he is of not being free and how exhausted it is to be afraid all the time and how much it wears him out. Every time he leaves his house, he has to wonder, am I going to get arrested today and go to jail for being black in America? Am I going to get beaten with batons and nightsticks and bloodied for something I didn't do? Am I going to hear my cousin was lynched in Mississippi because he looked at a white woman who was looking at him and her husband saw it, so they lynched him and burned his body? That strange fruit, it don't smell good. And it mars the history pages of our country. It mars the stories that we want to tell. That's a gross, disgusting history. And there's a reason why they want to erase those history pages. There's a reason why they don't want young Americans to recognize the tyranny and the evil that lives in the hearts of men, that expresses itself often through greed and sexual racial jealousy. It's a disgusting chapter in American history. And these men were overcoming. They were conquering that fear. They were expressing joy in spite of it. They were helping their community dance and live life and to feel joy and to feel the power of what art can be. Art is the great balancing act in this history book. The winners of the great wars write the history books. The losers of those wars, those cultures get to make great art. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want was not written by the Romans or the Egyptians. It was written by them slave Israelites. A man that's not free that can tell you what freedom is. And I'm telling you this, it puts us on the wrong side of history. And when we start oppressing the queer community and the trans community and women, and we start erasing the records of Stonewall and the civil rights and the American Indian legacy, we are becoming more empirical by the day. And the truth is, we've always been an oppressor. We've always been the bringer of great sorrow. And it just has to be reminded that we are not on the right side of history when we ban books and when we teach philosophies of hate. And when we try to eradicate the history that brought us to this present moment. But that message will never die because jazz was a coded message that you can't censor. You might be able to erase all of Martin Luther King's speeches. You might even be able to take away all Marvin Gaye and Stevie Wonder and Chuck D said. But every time Dizzy Gillespie, Charlie Parker, and these cats, John Coltrane, put that horn to their mouth, they were breaking chains of bondage. Louis Armstrong was an ambassador of freedom. Jazz is the most important music of the last 200 years, if not ever. Because it's a people finding joy in spite of sorrow, in spite of tyranny, in spite of oppression. And if you're listening to the music trying to think about the math and the numbers and the virtuosity, that's your own ego distracting you from hearing and feeling with your heart. Don't listen with your mind, listen with your heart. What is your heart telling you these men are saying? They're not telling you, look how good I can play a saxophone. I mean, that's an easy place for us to come from because as the ruling class, we don't get to make art in that light. It's just not part of our DNA. But if you think that's what they're saying, you've listened to too much Steve Vai and Eddie Van Halen. And don't get me wrong, I love Eddie Van Halen. Van Halen was a great chops writer. But it's not about ego. It's not about look at me. It's about feel me, hear me, and then see me. Notice what my freedom means to me and how at any cost I will express that voice. Because freedom is the only thing that allows us to persevere. And at any cost that people will struggle for that freedom, to not live in fear. Jazz lives in that ethos. And there's a reason why civil rights and the death of jazz are very coincidental. Because that power, that ethos slips into people get ready, there's a train a-coming. That ethos slips into Sam Cooke's A Change Is Gonna Come. Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, Mercy, Mercy Me, The Ecology. There's a reason why that music, Inner City Blues by Stevie Wonder, that message is grafted now and that torch is passed on to the soul singers. And there's a reason why jazz loses its fuel. It led us to civil rights. It creates civil rights. It is the train that brought us to soul music. To allow them to pick up a microphone and now to say how they felt. It's a powerful linkage. It's loud and it lives right through the music. So cheers to Ike Quebec. Cheers to Duke Pearson. Cheers to Lou Donaldson. Cheers to Grant Green. I mean, Art Blakey, Clifford Brown, the entire story we talked about. But this is an important chapter of American history. And let that coded message be translated. Let you hear what it's speaking and what it's saying. Because it will ring across the millennia. 5,000 years from now when no one remembers who Lady Gaga is. And Aerosmith is long forgotten. The music of Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie and John Coltrane and Lee Morgan and Louis Armstrong and Count Basie and Duke Ellington, that will be a classical music 500 years from now that they will teach in schools. And the freedom that it encompasses and the joy and the liberty and the overcoming of the fear is what makes it the most powerful art form and medication, not just for the musicians who played it, but for those who listened to it and went to the clubs to dance to it and found joy within their struggle. Boy, that's a powerful thing. It's why we go to see a play. It's why we go to see a movie. It's why we listen to music in the first place. It's to escape the drudgery of life, the stressors of life. And those under the most stress can make the most poignant art. And there's a reason why we don't read or teach the writings of the Roman people. A silver spoon doesn't allow one to really make great art. But those Israelites, still on our walls today, Follow in those footsteps. That parallel is strong and loud and cannot be denied. The Black American experience is the biblical side and the tyrannical side of Rome and Egypt and Babylon and Persia and all that. We are those armies. And these people live in occupation in our land. And Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong are the Moses in the rushes and the basket, leading their people out of the promised land, out of bondage into the promised land. And they're still on that journey. And there's still a lot of pushback, boy. There's still a lot of Americans uncomfortable with the ascension of a people to being equal to them, because they feel like they're entitled to so much more themselves. And the concept of sharing that Christ taught us so much about seems so foreign to so much of us. Anyway, please support the channel. Please support the coffee shop. Like I said, hit the Patreon. I mean, even better, hit me up in PayPal. Give me a donation for the shop. I'm going to pay my bills this month. Things are tight. It's been a very cold month. It's a short month, so I mean, money's tight. I need the help. I hate to ask for it, but it's just part of what the deal is, I guess. Y'all be blessed. Y'all stay safe. And listen to your jazz with open heart. Not open mind, open heart. And ask yourself, what else could they fucking be saying? Y'all be safe. We'll talk to you soon. Peace.